Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. It's a gloomy fall day and I had a gloomy reading month. In the month of October, I read 23 books and 2 of them were 5 stars and they were rereads. So in my favorite month of the year, the time for spooky reading, I just didn't have a great time. And I feel like I look at my TBR shelf, I don't want to look at it because there are so many things looking back at me that I wish I had read, because the amount of 3 stars across the board here is disturbing. But I still have a lot of things to say and maybe I can convince you why you'll love something here. And as I often do, I asked you how I should organize all of these books, and a lot of people said from like most appropriate to the season to least, spookiest to not. So I kind of did that. I also got quite a few people saying that I should rank it by the dedication, and I have to be honest, I don't think I've ever read the dedication of a book. But I guess a lot of people read it, look at it, think about it. So I thought I would read each of them to you and we could like rank them together. To me, a dedication just says like, to my mom, to Emma, I love you. Like, I don't know that I've ever noticed a dedication saying anything cool. So hopefully that does exist here and I'll just read them all to you. But to kick things off, the most appropriate for the spooky season, so I put some horror here because if you're still looking for something to read in the month of November, maybe one of these will fit the bill for you. Let's kick it off with The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a Carrie retelling. We're following a woman named, a teen girl, a young lady named Maddie, and she has been bullied throughout school. She's a little different. People make fun of her regularly and she has a tough home life. And then her school finds out that she's biracial and the bullying gets even worse. Throughout the book, the school itself has to like confront its racist traditions. Included in that is righting its wrongs by doing its first integrated prom. From there, perhaps Maddie's gonna get her revenge, and all the people who are terrible people who don't think they're terrible people will have to confront their pasts. If you typically love YA horror, I don't know why this wouldn't work for you. I gave it a 3 star. I thought it was good. All of the conversations it brought up, as usual, Tiffany D. Jackson does a fantastic job at. And I think you can enjoy it whether or not you've read the origin story. For me, the things going on, the unique storytelling, the podcast and the articles and all of that stuff did add an extra enjoyable element in Carrie for me, but didn't in this one. And if you want to discuss this live with me and my channel members, you can join with the link down below. This is our book club read for fall, and we have a live show coming up next weekend, I think. Next, I had to include The Burning Girls by CJ Tudor, which is a thriller with some horror vibes for sure. We're following a woman and her teenage daughter, and they move to a new town where she's going to work as the local vicar when the last one died by suicide, or at least that's what the town is saying. Her welcome gift into the new church is a box that includes exorcism supplies, and from there are quite a few different mysteries. There's a huge cast of characters. There's a lot of things to like ponder about throughout the story. I gave this 4 stars. I had a really good time with it. I would say the only people I wouldn't recommend this to is if you dislike being confused. Everything does like, you know, get solved in the end, but all of the chapters don't necessarily say who the perspective you're reading from is, so you're left in the dark for a good amount of the story. There's a ton of cliffhanger endings at the end of almost every single chapter. There's a lot of just storylines to follow, and I had a good time with it. One of my only 5 stars of the month, A House at the Bottom of the Lake by Josh Malerman, was a reread for me because I think I've just been questioning my feelings about this since I read it back in, I think, 2017. It's a story of obsession. There's a boy and a girl who go on their first date and they take a canoe out to this lake and they see a house under the water and they become obsessed, I think, with each other pretty quickly, obsessed with the relationship they've built in this house underwater because they have become obsessed with the house itself, and they're diving under and things in the house don't necessarily make sense. So it's this weird claustrophobic cosmic horror and it has a little ambiguity in it. It was really fun. It was frightening. And I feel like that's something that I will regularly reread, unlike the next one, which is The House on Cherry Street, The Haunting Book 1 by Rodman Philbrick and Lynn Harnett. This was a reread for my childhood favorites. I read this sometime in middle school, high school age, and it's the first book in a trilogy where there's this sibling duo who have just moved into this supposed haunted house. In this one, we just get ideas of the haunting, and I feel like it's a setup for future books in the series. Obviously, I didn't expect this book to frighten me at this current state in my life, but it also just wasn't that interesting overall. But obviously the perfect seasonal read, like for the child in your life, or if any children are watching. I hope not. Next up we have a horror anthology called After Sundown, edited by Mark Morris. These are short horror stories. I just said that. I read quite a few anthologies this month. This was my least favorite. I read portions of it in this video where I was reading stories, short stories, and novels, rereading some short stories from authors that I loved before. And so in that video I talked to you about like the Ramsey Campbell in here, the Grady Hendrix, the CJ Tudor, and the John Langan, none of which I liked. And then I continued to read on, and almost every story in here was 3 stars. There were a couple standouts, and what I will say is they all had really good or different atmosphere. Like none of the stories you could mistake for each other. One of them was like in a cemetery, one of them was on a spooky island, one of them was in the Arctic. And my 2 favorites are the one called The Importance of Oral Hygiene by Robert Sherman. And that one was written like in a letter from a woman to her husband's mistress. And then I think it must have been Creeping Ivy by Laura Purcell, which is about a garden getting its revenge. I just realized I didn't read the dedications because there isn't one in here and there isn't one in here. My bad. Let me back up. I'm rushing through this a little bit. Okay, House at the Bottom of the Lake is For the Craziness of Courtship, For the Heart of a House of Horrors Aflame, for Allison. I like that. I think I'm just gonna give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That's a thumbs up. The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson says this one is for me. For the little girl in pigtails who went running for the TV whenever her favorite horror movie came on, doing the absolute unimaginable when so many doubted her dreams, including herself. Look at you now, Tiff Tot. Look at you now. Okay, that's definitely a thumbs up. And then The Burning Girls is for Neil, Betty, and Doris, the tall and the cute and the furry. Sure, thumbs up. Why not? Well, I don't know. Can you say a dedication is bad? Because like it obviously means something to the author. Let's give it a thumbs down. Too boring. Another short story collection I have is Ghost Lake by Nathan Negan Newton Adler. And this is like interconnected Ojibwe horror, no, ghost kind of stories around this lake. There's this interconnected community, and it's not just about like, you know, actual spirits that are following you around. The dedication just says all my relations, which I like, but it's got a lot of things from trauma exploration to hauntings to death, and I really do like finding out how different stories are connected, different families, different friendship groups. I was most interested in that aspect of it, like seeing which people were going to come back, which kind of mysteries introduced a couple stories ago were going to get solved later, and that was really intriguing. I gave it 4 stars. Then I put the Saturday Night Ghost Club by Craig Davidson, because like this, it's kind of a coming of age story disguised as a horror. It is set like during Halloween. It makes it very fun for the season, but it's not like horror. It says, to Nicholas, with all the love in my body, which I like. This is about a small group of kids in the 80s. We have a main character who's 12 years old, and he's hearing a lot of stories from his uncle. He's a very eclectic uncle who owns a weird like oddities, curiosities shop. It's very low action and low thrills, but it is interesting, and if you love stories within stories, I would recommend it. I gave it 3 stars, which is weird because I've read books so similar to this and absolutely love them, but I just feel like if you're not in love with the storytelling and if you're not in love with the characters, like that's what really carries it. It has a very interesting ending. It has a lot of things to say. Like if you like picking up horror that seems to be one thing, but it's really just a big metaphor and it's just a message for something different at the end, I think that you'll enjoy this. Basically, this little friendship group hears these stories from this uncle, and they form this ghost club where every Saturday they kind of look into different local legends. It's just about learning. It's about them getting to know themselves and spending time together. And there is like some mysteries to solve in here, but like I said, it's not like big action. Okay, I need to turn on a lamp. Moving on to my favorite. Yeah, my favorite short story collection of the month. It's called Queer Little Nightmares, an anthology of monstrous fiction and poetry, edited by David Lai and Daniel Zamparelli. Now the idea of this, I don't think there's going to be a dedication because it's a collection. It's about mostly creatures and monsters from mythology all around the world, and them getting like a queer perspective, giving the monsters a queer identity. I loved so many of these stories. It kicked off with some really interesting ones where I don't even know that it's important that you recognize who the creature is. There are just some beautiful stories about like girls in love, one of them being a monster, and acceptance. And then the next one is the way that monsters are created out of hatred and homophobia. So there's a lot of like soft, nice stories, a lot of shocking, disturbing stories, and then also an equal amount of revenge plots. There are a couple I really didn't like that didn't feel like they really fit the collection perfectly in the middle. So I can't technically give this more than a 4, but it feels really good at a 4, and it's one of, I think it's gonna be one of my most recommended collections, especially if you're into things that get weird. Like I'm talking bodily fluids growing into creatures, disturbing images of like building a fake baby, and then also just like timely important topics, police violence, and like influencer culture. This book had a lot of things to say, and for the most part it was a good time. A weird time first, a good time second. Then we've got The Hunger by Alma Katsu, and the dedication is for my husband Bruce. I mean, that's good of her, but like so The Hunger takes place in 1846 to 1847 following the Donner Party, who is a group of settlers traveling from like one side of the country to the other. And throughout this story, we see them experience like missing people in their party. I think there's like 100 people, multiple different families, and also missing rations, and this paranormal introduction to the true story, where maybe something is following them. They are frightened of so much, whether it be each other or like magic or monsters. Like they don't really know what's happening, but something is very unsettling within the group. I gave it 3 stars. I think I expected it to be a little more scary and it to feel more tense throughout. It was pretty slow. There was a lot of paranoia, a lot of blaming each other for things, and just like interpersonal relationship stuff. I definitely see how this could work for a lot of people, but it wasn't my favorite. Then we've got You're Invited by Amanda Jayatissa, and this I just had a live show about if you want to witness the full discussion. This is a long one. To my mother, Kanisha, who encouraged me to be fearless, adventurous, and fun. Turns out that I'm none of these things, but I'm eternally grateful that you were a part of my life, even if it wasn't for as long as we both wanted. Wow. I mean, that's a good dedication. So this story is about a wedding week in Sri Lanka, and we're following 2 women who were best friends 5 years ago. One of them was dating this guy, and now 5 years later, they haven't spoken, and the other woman is marrying that guy. So now our main character is going to the wedding. She has been invited, and she is determined to stop the wedding. It's not so much told as her like solving any type of mystery, though I would call this a mystery book. The mystery is more on you as the reader, because it's told a lot in a series of interviews. Like after every chapter there's an interview with a party guest who is talking about who the suspects are and who they think is bad, and who the police should interview next, because you find out at the beginning of the book that the bride has gone missing. I gave this 4 stars if you're looking for something that is fun but also has some really great discussions throughout it. A whole cast of characters who are all very gossipy. It's a good time. If you're somebody who reads thrillers and thinks like, let's get to the point already, like enough dialogue, enough talking, like let's get to the thrills, this might not be for you. I just overall loved the writing of this. I loved following the story. I loved creating all of my theories with post-its. I created a character map in the back, which I would recommend if you easily forget like who everybody is and how they're all connected, because there's a lot of people in here, and there are probably like 4 or 5 reveals throughout, so even if you guess one thing, there's something else to be surprised by a couple chapters later. Next we've got Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chapeko, and their dedication says, for Tam, for pulling me out of the gutter. I like that. Simple, straight to the point. Let me read just a portion of the synopsis itself. It says, it's full of court intrigue, queer romance, and terrifying monsters in this gothic epic fantasy. So this is a vampire story, and we're following a character who's a vampire hunter, but it's not the type of story where vampires are bad and we're supposed to, I I don't know, root for this character to take down all the vampires because they themselves are half vampire. I feel like I would put the word mystery in there, like gothic urban fantasy mystery, because it feels kind of like a detective story. Our main character is tasked with taking down this like zombie vampire hybrid breed, and in that they get seduced by this vampire couple who brings them into their situation. They're working together, but they're also like engaging in this very soft, warm, and healing relationship that's really beautiful in the middle of just this vampire kind of war. He's working as a bounty hunter, but he's also just kind of a bumbling, kind, gentle soul, and it's just a very interesting perspective to read from. If you are somebody who is looking for like a fast-paced, just like fun action 3x speed audiobook experience, that's not this. Because I feel like sometimes books like this feel like that. They're just fun, they're palate cleansers, they're fast-paced, but this is something that really requires a lot of attention. From the very first page, there are words and ideas that you are introduced to in this unique world that you really have to take your time to understand. I found it overwhelming at first, ended up getting like a 4.25 from me because I felt like my time was really respected as the reader. It had really good payoff, it felt very intentional, and it was just an interesting time. It felt like the setup to the start of a series, so I am interested to see if that is a thing, because I would read more. Next up, I reread The Long Walk by Stephen King. This went from like a 5-star to a 4-star for me. Still definitely enjoyed it, but I wouldn't put it on a list of like must read Stephen King. If you're interested in going back and you've never read Stephen King before, like this isn't at the top of my list for you. It says this is for Jim Bishop and Bert Hatlin and Ted Holmes. Boring, but when you write 100 books, how unique can your dedications really be? I guess there's only a certain amount of people. This is something though that I might recommend for like a book club. If you're talking through the book as you read it, I think there are a lot of interesting discussions and themes and things to like converse with each other about while you read this. So it's about this walk that 100 boys between the ages of like 12 and 18 are invited to, and they just have to walk. It's not a race, but whoever is the last one still walking while all the others have dropped off, whether it be, you know, their own exhaustion or being taken out by the team of people following them to ensure they're keeping the right speed the entire time. We're following one main character who we're obviously rooting for, but the rest of the cast is also very interesting, and I think it would be cool to talk about like what people's different motivations are, why this character was featured and not this character, what character you predict is going to be at the end. It's probably a little too long. It includes some like weird moments, but overall it was a pretty decent reread for me. Now, Body and Soul Food I put in this middle section because like mystery to me still feels fall, even though that's not really true. Let's see the dedication here. This is the first book in a series, which I think I'll continue in even though I only gave this 3 stars. It says, love and support to all the friends and family in foster and kinship care, the adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents. God's got you. That fits with the book itself and makes sense. So in this story, you're following these twins who were separated at a very young age, and as adults they're coming back together and they're starting this business that's like a cafe slash bookstore. Like, isn't that the dream in the Pacific Northwest? It's got very good vibes, but unfortunately at the beginning of the book they witness the death of a foster brother, and from there they don't find that the police are doing a good enough job finding out why the death happens. It's a cozy mystery. I don't think I said that. And so you are, as usual, following some like amateur sleuths who are looking into what happened, and I found this a little like honestly confusing, which I never expect from a cozy mystery because usually they use very kind of plain language. It's easy to understand. It's supposed to be a fun time, but I just think this could have used a little bit more editing. Both of these characters were a little irritating to read from, the decisions they were making, the way they would rehash certain events, but I do want to continue in the series because I think there's an opportunity for both character development and like learning more about different family dynamics. There are a couple people introduced in here that I would like to read more from. I think the writing can only, that sounds rude, can only improve. I think it will improve as the series goes on, and I like these people enough and the way that the mystery went on the mix of like real life and the mystery and the cozy vibes that I think I would continue. But I'll probably wait to see if anybody has continued on because that second book just came out. So let me know. Now the next two, I don't know why I'm going through them together. This is Just As Long As We're Together by Judy Blume. And this is The Earth, My Butt and Other Big Round Things by Carolyn Mackler. These are both set at like Halloween fall times and follow just some young women. So this one, the dedication says, to my friend Stephen Murphy, who touched my life with his courage, dignity, and never-ending sense of humor. Lola will always remember. Sure, thumbs up to that. This one is to Jonas Rideout for listening and laughing and loving. Okay. I mean, these did come out in the 80s, 90s. I feel like dedications have gotten more unique, at least from what I'm getting here. Anyway, these are just like interesting preteen stories. This one about a girl making a new friend, having some body image issues. Her parents are separating. I don't rate a lot of my childhood rereads, but I think this one like holds up enough, I guess. This one doesn't so much because I feel like all of the body image issues, some are there to make you feel good by the end about this main character who's really struggling with everybody telling her to lose weight throughout the story. But some things are left in places that don't feel good, including like her brother being accused of rape. And a lot of the story, obviously she's the main character, but focusing on like how she is dealing with that. I don't think this is on anybody's TBR, so I don't really need to convince you either way. Then we've got another childhood reread, Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This was my other 5-star of the month. It's one of my all-time favorite books, favorite classic, favorite book I read in school, and I'm so glad that it held up. Though there are definitely some things I didn't love in here, but it's basically, if you don't know, about a bunch of schoolboys whose plane goes down and they have to survive on this island together. They create different groups. There's a big power struggle. There are terrible things that happen on this island in this short period of time while they're waiting for rescue. They have certain motivations when they get there about, you know, survival and being saved, and then people's just desires change, and it's a little bit of a descent into madness, I think, because you know, they're starving and they're alone and they're having to deal with things they've never dealt with before, and it gets just really intense as they lose control over things that they've always had control over. A Universe of Wishes I didn't really know where to put in this stack. Hold on. Does this have a dedication? For my mother and father. I mean, if you're gonna dedicate like such a well-known story to somebody, it better be your mom and dad. Anyway, A Universe of Wishes I didn't know where to put because fantasy doesn't really feel, if it's not set in a certain season, like I don't really know where seasonally to put it. Like I have a summer story at the end here. I guess I don't know, like, you know how people associate like colors with the days of the week, like Monday is blue, or is Wednesday blue? Friday's red, Thursday's orange, Sunday's yellow, but is that just because the sun appears to us as yellow? Anyway, do you associate genres with seasons or months? Because I do feel like fantasy is kind of fall vibes, but maybe it's more spring vibes. I know it's not winter or summer. Is it winter or summer for you? This doesn't really have a theme besides being from a diverse collection of authors, and they're all fantasy stories. I read this again in that video where I was rereading certain authors. I gave 5 stars to the Anna Marie McLemore, Danielle Clayton, and Rebecca Roanhorse in here, as I expected to. And then after that video, I went and read the rest. My favorites were Unmore by Marcus Shiro, which was just about a guy interacting with magic. And then The Silk Blade by Natalie C. Parker, which had like a competition and consorts involved with that. The Anna Marie McLemore was a Cinderella retelling. The Danielle Clayton was one that was like sci-fi and about investigating your heart. Overall, a lot of the stories were just okay, but they were all 3 and 4 or 5. I didn't dislike anything in here. And there's also 2 I didn't read because they were like attached to The Darker Shade of Magic and the Gemma Doyle series, which I haven't finished, and I don't really like reading short stories that are in other book series, even if you don't have to read them to understand the short story. So I don't really know how to rate this one. I feel like a 3 or a 4. There were so many 5 stars that I feel like I have to give it a 4. Then we've got Rosewater by Tade Thompson. This is the first book in a trilogy that takes place in Rosewater, Nigeria. It's a science fiction story about the town being surrounded by this like alien biodome, and some people have come in contact with it and been infected by this like bacteria, and now they have some abilities, like memory things and like going into people's minds kind of. I ended up giving this 4 stars. And I think I want to continue in the trilogy, but I don't know for sure. We're following a government agent in here who is tasked with some different things, finding different people. There's kind of 3 different timelines in here. And I think as you continue in the series, you're actually following from different perspectives, which does make this one feel like it can stand on its own. And I enjoyed this as just the story that it was. I think the people I wouldn't recommend this to is if you dislike reading from unlikable main characters. Like, he has a very off-putting kind of voice, but it makes sense for the story and it's very intentional. And also, this book does not hold your hand. It doesn't explain things in like a third-person perspective. You're just very much dropped into this world and in the mind of this person, and you're putting all the pieces together as you read, which is good because there's a lack of like info dump and overwhelming chunks of explanation, but also I feel like you're just lost for half the book. You're slowly just trying to grasp onto what the world actually looks like, what his abilities actually are, and I had a really good time with it. Oh, I actually put the 4 books that I read together in this video all side by side, I just realized. So the next one is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. I didn't read the dedication. This one is to Leigh and Hunter, the father and the son. That's okay. And then Sleeping Giants is, oh no, it is in French. It says, A Theodore, maintenant on va t'apprendre à lire et l'anglais, which is in English, to Theodore, now we will teach you how to read in English. Something like that. This is a story set in South Dakota. There's a girl who falls into a hole and falls into the giant hand of a robot. And now, decades later, she is a scientist in charge of this group of people who is responsible for looking for the rest of this like robot's body, finding out where it came from, what it does. And it's mostly told in a series of interviews from this kind of anonymous overseeing voice who has a lot of questionable morality, who will do anything to find out what happened, essentially. So there's just a lot of people, a lot of dialogue talking about what has transpired over the last bit of time as they've researched what this hand was, where it came from, what it does, all of those things. Contrary to what I said about Sliver Under Nightfall, which is it's not like the fast-paced, speed up the audiobook, just have a good time palate cleanser, this one is. Highly recommend the audiobook. It's funny because I said in my review in that video that like if I didn't pick up the sequel immediately, I would forget everything that happened in here and I would probably never read it. And that's where we are now. I've forgotten everything that went down in here. I remember not feeling totally satisfied by the end and not feeling like it had a really great conclusion, but it was still a 3.5 star because I did have a good time. But yeah, unfortunately, not very memorable, which is sad because I know that's a lot of people's like favorite series. Maybe not a lot of people, but some people. Then we've got Upgrade by Blake Crouch. Again, sci-fi doesn't feel like it fits into a specific season. Maybe winter if I had to choose. Upgrade, I think I landed on a 2.5 by the end. I'll try to link to some people because I know some people were talking about how they took issue with a lot of like the gene changing, DNA altering conversations that happened in here. I feel like when I read sci-fi like this that has a lot of really heavy science talk, I am just like glazing over it all because I don't really care to understand what they're talking about. The characters understand what they're talking about, and that's all that matters. So in this science fiction book, we're following a man who has been involved in like this science, like the field of science and gene altering stuff with his mother. And something went down a while ago that, I don't know, was like bad for humanity. And now he's working still, but he comes into contact with like this stuff that has compromised his own genes, and he has no control over it, and it might affect all of society, and now he has to save the world. And suddenly he has all of these like new abilities, whether it be just like reading faster, having stronger memories. It's a little superhero-y, it's a little action movie. Actually, it's heavily action movie-y. You've got like villains, you've got heroes. It's very fast-paced. It feels like a movie. It was not really my taste. I remember feeling entertained, but there just wasn't a lot of substance in here. And I think the internal monologue, there's just constant inner monologue, is what took away from the enjoyment. If this was in third person, maybe it would come across a little more like genuine, the explanations. But I just remember like being in this man's head, and the way that he's talking is not like how your internal thoughts would be functioning, because like he was just explaining so many things to us as the reader, but it's not like this was written to the reader. So maybe if it was written in journal entries or like a novel with inside the novel or in third person, it could have just been overall more of a thoughtful approach. But I do understand people who like it. It's another kind of forgettable one for me, and I forgot again. For Michael McClellan, Marine Lawyer, Dear Friend, 1946 to 2021. Next, we've got In a Garden Burning Gold by Rory Power. This is the first book. I think it's a duology. Yes, it is. Epic fantasy. It said, oh, I can't read that. My apologies. I don't know who that dedication is for. This one I gave 2 stars, and I would just recommend that you wait until the sequel comes out. This did get a recovering, and I feel like this is far more appropriate and does like represent the type of story. And then the sequel was recently announced, and this feels like a 400-page setup for the sequel. So I would read them back to back if you're interested. Normally I wouldn't say that with a new release, but like this one already has a publication date, so like it's coming out no matter how successful this one is. You know what I mean? I've never read a book where I could describe it as, you know, when you watch a movie trailer and you finish the movie trailer and you're like, I don't even need to see the movie. That's how I feel about the synopsis. This entire synopsis was the 400 pages. Though it's marketed as adult, it feels very YA. These characters are supposedly hundreds of years old. And we have one of our main characters who like gets married every 4 years and has to kill that person repeatedly throughout her hundreds of years long life, because her family rules over this place and they control everything, like the seasons, the tides, the stars. There's a lot of just like family dynamics in here. She is deciding who she wants to marry. Her brother wants her to marry someone else. There's a lot of political intrigue, power imbalances in the family, them challenging each other for what they want with their future. I was decently enjoying it for like half. I thought it would be like a high 3-star, if not a 4. And then I was just waiting for like something to actually happen, because I thought it was building to something, and then it didn't. It was just a story of these people being scared of their daddy, who was not particularly frightening. I just didn't buy into pretty much anything that was happening in here. I feel like it is well discussed, it's well described. The trauma, the history that they've been through, the feelings that they all have, it just never felt genuine, and I at no point enjoyed the writing, which is really rare for me in Rory Power. There was just no element of this that ended up being compelling or well done or unique, but I feel like I still would consider reading the sequel, depending on what people say about it, because like, you know, it's gonna be over in one more book, and maybe a lot is gonna happen and it's gonna be really good. You know, it's actually unfair that I'm putting Get Real, Sweet Valley Junior High by Francine Pascal this low, because it actually does take place in fall or like the end of summer, because they are going back to school, and I guess those are fall vibes. There's no dedication in here. This was obviously a reread. I didn't pick this up for the first time at this point in my life, but this was my most nostalgic pick. I'm really running out of my voice. If you've ever read the Sweet Valley High books, you know Elizabeth and Jessica. This is them when they have to start a new junior high, middle school. They're separating from a lot of their friends and just starting over, meeting new people, challenging like their old friendships. And that's pretty much all it is. I don't have a really solid review or a rating for that one. But lastly, we've got Cool for the Summer. Naturally, it's a summer read, so we feel pretty far away from summer. It just snowed today. This is by Dahlia Adler, and it's dedicated to Tamar. This may not be a sister book, but what fiction could compare to the real thing anyway? Sure. Cool for the Summer is a YA. Actually, it's going back to school too. In the summertime, she met this girl and she had a relationship with a girl for the first time. So she's grappling with that, how to identify her sexuality. We also get a good amount of the other girl and figuring herself out too. But at the same time, she's going back to school, and the guy who she's had an unrequited crush on for so long is showing feelings for her now. So they start up a little bit of something, but obviously there's like jealousy involved. It's a really traditional kind of like angsty miscommunication love triangle YA book, but it has the bisexual representation. It's got really good conversations, and Dahlia Adler's writing is just really solid. I read this because I've given 5 stars to every short story that I've ever read from her. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if I said that, but if you are into YA contemporaries, I would put this at the top of your list because it's perfect for its audience. Anyway, that's it. Right as the sun has gone down and my battery is dying, the timing is perfect. That's everything that I read. 23 things. A lot of like good books, but no new favorites, which is okay because I have so many favorites already that I don't even know that I can add anything. I already have my favorites video of the year planned in my head, like 10 solidified choices. Though my rating of the year on Goodreads has gone back down to a 3.6, which is so devastating because it's the lowest it's ever been, but I feel like I've had so many wins. But I guess like I am reading so many just mediocre things, and I wish my October had gone differently, but I can't think about the past. I just have to move on, and November is going to be a good one, I think. So I'll see you later. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.